Okay,
Just a picture.
all right, we're live now, so I think we'll get started. Looks like it's all working. So thank you everybody for coming. Going to call the meeting to order. And so we're here for the Warrant Committee. We've got Jeremy, Jill, Bob, myself, Christine, Newton, Steve, Ed, and Amanda. Can you just announce that you're participating remotely, please?
Sure, Amanda Hall via Zoom.
All right. And so before we talk about lovely water, we're just going to spend a few minutes and get our favorite town employees back off. So how do you want to do it, Christine? Do you want to, do we want to talk about the debt and like which order would you like to go?
We can do the debt first. I think there was a question that was asked with the financial team where the interest rate has come from.
Yes, and so I think if you guys could cover where the interest rates come from, where the debt kind of projections stand. And then maybe we can talk about the two different votes that have to get passed.
So the interest rate, I'll refer to FA. FA is our financial advisor. That's Hilltop. I've been here for 30 years and we've used Hilltop for 30 years. They're very well known in the business. Our September bond sale came in at 1.46%. So when they're giving us estimates for a prospective bond sale in January of 22, they're basing this estimated rate of interest in January on the 1.45%. Because that is a good representation of what a AA1 bond sell at. Take all the attributes of the town. I don't anticipate on being downgraded. I do believe that we will hold our AA1. However, keep in mind that rates are rising. I did have a discussion with them this morning. Rates are climbing. And I know we've talked about it before many times with a couple members of the Warrant Committee. We're looking at rates for January of 22, but the FA has also given us rates of January of 23, and you can see a significant change in the interest rates. So we all know where the rates are going to be in 23. They're going to be up there, which is why they're advising us to borrow in January of 22. Your 20-year estimate right now, if we borrow in January, the middle of January, is at a 1.75%. That was when they last estimated it to us, which is probably a couple of weeks ago. I can get rates from them, or I can get projections from them every day, and it's just going to change every day, depending on the market and what they've sold and how we compare to the municipalities they sell and what they sell for, whether they're tax exempt or not. And also whether they're a 20-year or a 30-year. So when we looking at the 1.46%, which was the interest rate that the town was able to secure when we borrowed the new treatment plan, they took that and they're able to estimate the 1.75 20-year if we were to borrow in January of 22. Obviously, your 30-year is going to have a higher interest rate, which is how they came up with the 50 basis points higher at the 2.25%. So, and again, your 20-year and 30-year, you're paying more interest over the 30-year, but keep in mind that the interest rate is still lower, and you're meeting a different group within 30 years than you are with 20 years.
Hasn't changed since we last talked.
No, since we talked about this like,
Yeah.
no, I was just gonna ask somebody wanted a clarification.
Clarification on where the rates came from, yeah.
And they're already here, so if you want.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This may be covered later, but I recall from the discussion before, but when you take the borrowing, is there a timetable on when that money needs to be expended, or?
Yes, so there is a timetable that we do need to follow as to how the bond proceeds are spent over the project, yes. And we do have a cash flow statement that has been given to us, yes.
So a January borrowing would follow the schedule that's in the current
Yes.
proposal?
The January borrowing, I don't know if I brought the cash flow with me. I believe it was like 4.5 million, like the first 4 months of the bond issue.
Yeah, there's the billing will be lower up until we actually start construction, so that'll just be design funds and all the consultants, et cetera. And then when we start construction, that's when larger dollars are expended. So I think that's what the theory was looking at, you know, do we borrow it right away, or do we borrow, you know, in the future when the larger bills start to hit? And depending on the marketplace, that may mean a big difference in interest rates. So the current advice seems to be borrow as soon as possible, so we can lock in those low rates because they're projected to go up. If they were projected to go down, we probably would take a different tack.
My original plan was to do a short-term and a bond anticipation note, and to do that maybe like for 6 months, and then to borrow probably like early July, so that the first P&I wouldn't be due until the next fiscal year. But after talking to the FA, their immediate reaction was, if you want to secure a low rate, you need to borrow in January.
So when and how do we decide whether we want to do a 20-year versus a 30-year?
That is the selectmen, I believe, decide that. I don't decide that.
And I think you had mentioned the selectmen meeting, you told me they have to decide by like sometime in December if you're gonna bond in
believe it's
January.
by December 17th or 18th, yes.
I think they were leaning toward a 30-year.
Yeah.
Expressing interest in the 30-year for various reasons.
30-year, that payment goes down every single year. So it goes down to that, you know, 400,000, 500,000 a year. That frees up, and that can pay for some additional costs in the operating budget, as opposed to the 20-year, which had the same payment every year for 20 years. You never had any relief from that number. So they like that aspect. Plus, this 30 years is school's supposed to last 50 years. We're at a point now where interest rates are low. Makes more sense, I think, when you look at it in total to borrow over 30.
There was ever a time when you probably would do 30.
Well, the impact of future projects obviously will decide whether you do a 20-year or 30-year, and whether you do a level principal or a level debt.
Georgia, a minor question, but we were just rated and affirmed at AA1. Was that in conjunction with the water treatment bonds?
Yes.
Okay. And you just indicated, you hope we don't
We
get
still have to
downgraded.
go through the entire
Right.
process all
So
over
when we
again.
come to the market with 60+ million, we'll be rated again.
Yes,
Or they'll just catch up on.
the FA does not anticipate that we will be downgraded, and they certainly don't anticipate that we will be upgraded. Not much will change when we borrowed it. We're still in the same fiscal year, and we won't have any results. But we do have to go through the entire process.
So if we do borrow it all upfront, we don't need some of the cash flow until a year, 2 years out. What are some of the limitations on so those funds can, and the bulk of the money we put in interest-bearing
So
accounts?
that's a problem that I discovered. Nobody wants our money. Banks just can't get rid of it. So right now, the water treatment plant money is sitting at MMDT, which is the state depository account, and it's earning 0.9%, which is great compared to what I could get from other banks. But I approached 2 or 3 other banks, and nobody
There's no
wants it.
other investment vehicles that might
I
be
can
yours?
do CDs, but you cannot invest it in anything more than that. Plus, I have a cash flow statement that I need to adhere by.
Well, that MMDT rate, that's a pretty good rate.
0.9%.
Yeah. That's a sort of.
At one point in our financial history, recent history, not the towns per se, but globally, there was a time when institutions were charging people to place money. The market was essentially frozen and didn't want any more liquidity. So 90 basis points is pretty good.
And it's safe.
That's important.
Exactly. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email me, or Christine or Nick, and I'd be happy to answer them. And as we get closer, we can definitely run more projections.
Okay. Do you want to run through the?
Yeah, so I think there was one other question that came to me last week, and that was clarification on why there are 2 votes. So for clarification, the special town meeting, which is Sunday, November 7th, is to appropriate the money for the project and authorize the treasurer collector to borrow the money with the approval of the board of selectmen. The special town election, which would be November 15th, is actually to approve the Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion vote. That allows us to then pay for the project and all of the borrowing costs. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I'll be at the election to explain this to people, there is no amount of money in the ballot article. And that is because we don't know what the cost, those borrowing costs will be yet. So it's just authorization to borrow the 63 million and pay it through the debt exclusion, including any of the interest and borrowing costs.
But does the $63 million number appear anywhere, like in the, if it's not in the article at town meeting, is it in the motion?
There'll be a motion.
And so the motion has basically the principal number, because then if you don't know
At
the
town
interest into
meeting,
it,
we will
at town
use the
meeting.
63 million. You're actually gonna use the total
You're gonna
project
use
amount, so we're gonna,
81.
we're
Yeah.
gonna, yeah.
Okay.
You have to-
Appropriate the total amount and then authorize the treasurer to borrow the town's portion, but not the town's. When you go to the ballot, you're authorizing the assessors to increase your tax bill in excess of 2.5%.
Gotcha.
And we're working on the special town meeting website that we do for every annual and special that we have, and we'll break down that information.
Does anybody else have any other questions for the financial team before we jump into water? I think that I need to, do you think Sarah, I see Sarah Pulls is here. Do you think I should, is she here to talk about this stuff?
She was here to talk in case you needed her. Yeah.
I'm just gonna promote her, and if she wants to sit back. And then I see Carol Reed. Okay. All right, so we are gonna jump into water, and I'm gonna very swiftly hand this over to Steve Callahan, because he's become our resident warrant committee water expert.
Among many other things.
That's right. We didn't know he was joining the warrant committee to learn about water, but here you are.
He's pretty good about modules too.
Thank you all for coming today. That's very, very useful. You know, as Bob Sliney has said many times in his speech, we're undertaking an education process for everybody on the committee. And the hope is that that will benefit the citizens and the residents of the town, become more informed on these issues. And so water is sort of come up as an issue. And you know, the purpose of this meeting is really to focus on water resources and engage in a discussion, you know, with you folks on subject matter experts. I know there's when I'm done here, we can introduce all the people who are remotely attending. And but basically the objective is, you know, a conversation, just basically to get some background on you know, the water matters in Medfield, general background, understanding of any water issues and their related, you know, mitigation or best management practices as it relates to the new elementary school. And you know, we've gotten, you know, in the agenda, there were sort of 3 broad areas that we've identified. First one is sort of, you know, and we'd like to maybe just organize the conversation around these 3, so starting with, you know, sort of the Mass DEP Zone 2, Medfield's Aquifer Protection District, permitted uses in our bylaws, including the Well Protection District for wells 3 and 4. And, you know, I think that's the first area. The second area is sort of existing conditions at the Wheelock site, the 44 acres, and what potential risks exist today, if any, to our groundwater. And then the last one is sort of, you know, the post development plans. That is, how will that impact our groundwater and aquifers and the wells 3 and 4 from the new elementary school. So those are the three broad areas. We have sort of questions in each of them. Couple away, I'm sure, with their own questions. But maybe it'd be a good idea just to introduce people who are remotely here. And it would be good, I think, for us to hear their backgrounds.
Sure. You're looking at me, so I'll jump right in. For the record, Mike Quinlan, Chair of the School Building Committee. With me tonight, I have our team from Arrow Street, Larry Spang and Tina Suhu. Larry is the principal at Arrow Street and Tina is our project manager. And I have Sandy Brock and Mark Gabriel from Mitch Engineering. They are our civil engineer on the project. So again, we're representing the project and how the project will proceed. But I know you also have some others from the town that maybe want to introduce themselves.
Sure. Christian Carpenter, Board Water and Sewer. Phil Harvey, Board of Water and Sewer as well.
Mr. Lake, Director of Public Works. With us tonight is Eric Kelly from Environmental Partners. I know Sarah Raposa was invited as well, being town planner, as well as Carol Reed from the Board of Health.
And just for the record, Eric is the civil engineer for the water treatment plant project and has the town for quite some time as well.
Okay.
As a consulting engineer.
So we have a lot of engineers, I guess, including
We
you.
brought the experts.
The Board of Health.
Oh, yes, and Steve from the Board of Health is here also.
Steve Resch.
Yes.
Dr. Resch. You're dealing with us. Okay, I think we've got everybody,
I
right?
think we do. You can start with your questions.
So maybe just to start off, I think, again, this is conversational. It's meant to educate everybody here as well as anyone that's going to watch this later on. Tell us about sort of the Medfield water resources and the different regulatory zones or districts and boundaries that exist within the town. How do they define, how do they operate, and sort of their purpose and permitted uses in each of the zones? I don't know who's best to do that. Maybe Mo or Bill?
I think I'd like to defer that to Eric Kelly.
Okay.
Eric's been working with us, and I think he would have the best handle on it to explain all that.
Okay.
Here.
Go ahead, Eric.
All right, thanks everyone for having me. So the town has a diverse water supply system. You have groundwater supply wells that exist within two basins, both the Charles River and what is considered the Boston Harbor, or in this case, the Neponset Basin. So the town is regulated on the amount of water that they're allowed to withdraw in total from all of its sources under the Water Management Act. The town has both Water Management Act registrations, which are currently unrestricted uses, and they also have permitted withdrawals. So wells 3 and 4, which are the wells just southeast of the existing Wheelock School, those are regulated both under the town's permit and under the well fields registration. So under that registered withdrawal, they can withdraw just under 1 million gallons per day average over the year, which goes against the town's total of just over 1.5 million gallons per day across all of its sources around town. So those establish kind of your quantity, if you will. The quality of the water is regulated through the state drinking water regulations. So they're looking at things like primary contaminants of concern, which would be things like bacteria, VOCs, and the like. PFAS is the new one that's hard to avoid in the news. And then you have secondary things like iron, manganese, color, odor, and taste compounds. So in the case of the well field, the project is being undertaken to address source water, iron, and manganese quality issues. So those are secondary standards. So that is more on the quality side of things. So Mass DEP is the regulatory authority as far as quantity and quality with the town's water sources. So right now, as it exists, well 3 is operating at roughly half of its available capacity due to hydraulic issues. So that is being replaced under this project, under the water treatment plant project. And well 4 has been underutilized for over 20 years due to water quality concerns with iron and manganese. So essentially, we're looking to restore the well field to its original historical uses and capacities. As far as protection goes, Mass DEP also regulates some of the protective buffers that are provided to water supplies. In the case of groundwater supplies, you have two. One is called the Zone 1, which is a 400-foot radius drawn from the center of the well. In the case of wells 3 and 4, that essentially protects the immediate area around the wellhead. Then they expand that out to the approved DEP Zone 2, which essentially is all the lands that potentially could contribute groundwater to those water supplies. So those tend to be much broader areas. They follow surface water features. They can follow certain topography. So high points kind of fall out of there. Places along, they generally kind of cluster along the surface waters that contribute water to those watersheds. So in the case of the Zone 2 of wells 3 and 4, it actually stretches to the east into Walpole, stretches to the north towards along the town line, and goes into the center of town. So those Zone 2s also then can intersect with the Zone 2 for wells 1 and 2. In well 6, they can also be contributory to other towns' water supplies. So they don't honor municipal boundaries. It's a hydrogeologic boundary. Back in the early 2000s, Mass DEP took the effort for all the public water systems in Massachusetts to do what they called the SWAP, or Source Water Assessment Program. So it was looking at what are potential vulnerabilities within water supply contributor areas. So that was done in the early 2000s. Some communities have updated it since, but essentially it was doing a 10,000-foot view of land uses, property types, known environmental threats to water supplies. What do you need to do in terms of land use and controls, bylaws, and the like? So in the past 20 years, Mass DEP has implemented requirements on local zoning and land use regulations to try and increase the level of protection at wellheads and for surface water supplies. So those have kind of been things that have been enforced down through the regulations, and at certain times for certain communities that has actually been required by administrative consent. So the town of Medfield's bylaws are in addition to those Mass DEP protections. So I know there's some questions coming likely in terms of how there's a lot of semantics here. So there's use of zones and things that when Mass DEP might mean one thing and slightly something different under the bylaw. So that's kind of a quick dime summary of the water supply.
Well, I think in an earlier meeting, and you referenced, can you give a little bit of the history of the environmental partners with Medfield? Because I know it's a current question.
Right, environmental partners have been here, well, I've been here for 5 years, they've been here probably in the 70s to start with different projects. I know they worked on the land, the transfer station, they've worked on so many different projects with water and sewer related projects, the hospital tank, yep. So they've been instilled in the town of Medfield as far as they have a real plethora of information of our entire town and different aspects of the town. The only thing they probably aren't into is more of the highway related projects. So we rely on them for a lot of history, a lot of things that things that happened in the past, and Eric has been done a great job with us since I've been here. I count on him for a lot of different things. Not that he's not only the engineer, but the water and sewer part of this the top notch for that.
Yeah, if I can add to that, is prior to us moving forward with the filtration project, we led a team to go find other sources of water within Medfield. So drilling in 16 or 18 different locations that the town has rights to operate a well on that land. We, through a broad survey as well as exploration, to go find water. So UPG has not only historical context and understanding how Medfield use patterns and infrastructure is, but also in planning the future and helping us really find out exactly what we have outside the historical context, but finding the true water sources that we have.
As a business partner, so to speak, in water management for the town, would environmental partners be aiding you in any regulatory filings and or hearings that you have to do in front of Mass DEP?
We ask, when we need to, we ask for their guidance, but, you know, they're not, you know, doing regulatory things for us unless we.
We stand up on our
Are you
own.
referring to the permitting process for the project or something
Just in
outside?
general, whenever.
We're starting an annual rhythm where we look at all our permits with EPG relative to water itself. So
they, both Mo and Bill, you'd use EPG as sort of a peer review of the project team's work? If you
No,
needed to?
so the peer reviewer that currently that the town uses for permitting is Tetra Tech.
That's what they-
That, yeah, that's our proposal that answers that question over today. So that's normal. So when projects, especially with small towns, complex projects like this, they often don't have the expertise in-house. They hire a third party, and I would expect we to do the same. We hire a third party peer reviewer that's hired by the authority having jurisdiction. So it could be the Conservation Commission, or it could be the planning board, or and they tend to all use that. That peer reviewer does a complete thorough analysis. There's often some back and forth with the design team about tweaking the design a little bit here and there. But that third-party peer reviewer ultimately submits their report to those authorities having jurisdiction, and that becomes a part of the order of conditions at the end of the project when approval is received.
I saw
But
Sarah
that's
turn
different.
her video off. I don't know if she wanted to jump in.
What's that?
And I'm
Is that-
nodding, yes, I can confirm that Mike's stating the accuracy of the process.
So with regard to, you know, in our bylaws, we have this well protection district. The wells 3 and 4, it's like a 2,000-foot boundary. Can you explain, you know, for everybody, which parts of the project are inside that boundary and which parts are outside? And in particular, the part that's inside, you know, maybe sort of focus us in on exactly what that is.
Sure. I mean, I think I sent you a plan just for record, just showing, we did put it on our survey of the entire site, so we knew exactly where that radius stood. And well 3 kind of just catches a corner of the parking lot, the southern parking lot, and the access road down to the wells in terms of new development, and as well the new soccer field. Well 4 catches both parking lots and the soccer field. And so it's just right at the tip of the corner of the building, kind of just touches it right now. That's about it.
And then,
No, we're not.
taking questions. So, with regard to the environmental partners, there's been some discussion about sort of, you know, there's this environmental partners letter that was done in connection with the well project. Wells 3 and 4. Can you talk a little bit about what's, why that was done, and sort of the purpose of that letter?
It was obvious that there is an intersection of the filtration projects, especially as we're leading up into the town meeting. And in preparation of that, it's sort of possible intersection of the school project with that. So it was considered part of the normal due diligence to look at the intersection point. Just for the essence, actually for the filtration project itself. So we use EPG services to investigate and, you know, render some opinions. That's well within most discretion for getting those services hired jurisdiction.
And
I would think.
And also, just, sorry, if you don't mind, Steve, I just wanted to add, I did reach out to Mo to talk about it because I wanted to confirm our team had made their judgment and they deemed that they reviewed all the bylaws as they would on any project. They reviewed all the codes and regulations and they said that this is, while that protection district is there, it's a permissible use within that district. It's specifically outlined in our bylaws that is a permissible use, safe use for that zone. And so I wanted to confirm that with Mo, and I asked Mo, if he would look into it. And he thought it'd be better to have, again, a professional consulting engineer who's working on the water treatment plant project to review it. And the letter that he issued agreed with the stance of our project.
When you say project team, do you mean Arrow Street or do you mean?
Arrow
Niche?
Street and Niche and all of the team that is charged with making sure the project abides by all local laws and state codes. And regulations.
I mean, it strikes me as something prudent to do for both projects, right?
That was the other.
Yeah, the $12 million project, that's a prudent thing to do for that, and also.
And the other thing we wanted to coordinate was to make sure that we weren't putting in work on the water treatment plant project, which was ahead of this project, that would then need to be modified or changed that on the school project should proceed. So we were coordinating, they had to do a force main up from the water treatment plant project out to the sewer. And so we coordinated just on the location of that such that the new project doesn't need to move it or doesn't need to modify it, because that's just money wasted. So in anticipation of a possible project, we wanted to make sure we weren't, putting in work that would unnecessarily need to be modified.
Bill, from your perspective, for the well project, I'm assuming that.
And who better to do it than
Yeah.
PG? They know
Yeah.
exactly where we're coming from. They understand the bylaws and guidance.
Yeah, not just the domain expertise, but to expedite it, because when this March-ish, we're leading up into the end of the town meeting, that even if we decided to go hire someone else, the cycle time for hiring and bringing someone in and having them try to understand it would take, we wouldn't have been responsive to the town meeting. Yeah, exactly. So-
But then also, again, getting back to further, there's, on top of all of this, this is just for, this phase. The permitting phase has all sorts of other requirements and meetings and hearings, public hearings with different authorities having jurisdiction. And more engineers will continue to have input on the project so that there are plenty of eyes outside of the project team that are confirming what we're putting forth. Okay.
Any questions on this first part?
Well, the question on the letter, because, to Mo and to Bill, and that there's been some comments that the letter was actually ambiguous. And that, I think, I'm not sure exactly what the wording was, but I think it was.
No significant risk.
You saying no significant risk
Significant
implies impact. So, I mean, you've got the history. How do you read that letter? From your perspective, I mean, I'd say any of you, but you give up the expertise. Right? You can say-
Yes,
Alright, go on there.
Maybe Eric should say what.
Well, we read it as a board, we accepted the language, how we interpret it, that there are design standards and codes that need to be followed. And that's, those have to be followed for anything to be successful. So their charge was not to write the specifications for anything for a new school project.
So more due diligence on our part to see if there were any impacts that we were going to observe with, if there was a school that goes there, if it goes to the other location, it's really up to Arrow Street and the design team to put in safeguards to protect, groundwater, stormwater management, best management practices. So regardless of where it goes, if it was going to the Dale location, it would be the same thing.
do some due diligence, to see if there's any serious impacts to any kind of issues. We're in charge of stormwater as well.
Right, but I guess as a layperson, and we get a lot of lay people making judgments on a letter. When you read no significant impact, what does that tell you as?
So, in my paid job, I'm a consultant, like Eric, different kind of projects, but the language he used didn't even strike me as unusual, but very commonly, kind of a common way to approach the question was, you're worried about it, there's no significant impacts here. In the back of my mind, there's always minor impacts. There's always little things. When you build a new project in a place where there's nothing now, there's going to be small things. Identifying exactly what those things are is probably impossible, but nothing significant, nothing that you have to lose sleep over or have to put extra money in the budget over or have to worry about from an environmental perspective is how I read it. I think it would be pretty useful to ask Eric to offer a comment on how he meant it.
And so we shall.
Thanks, Christian. So it's
Under the bus, there you go.
So it's in part of my career, I have done a fair amount of environmental due diligence. A lot of people refer to them as ASTM phase 1 or phase 2 property transaction. There were their research on to support the purchase or sale of a property. So it's pretty common that you can't be capable of saying there is no risk or no impact, but you are looking for things of significance. In the case of land development in a relatively open space or greenfield site, you're looking at subsurface disposal of sanitary waste. The proposed school thankfully is making use of the municipal sewer system, so that's not an issue of subsurface discharge of treated wastewater. You're also looking at either presence or the potential presence of significant quantities of hazardous materials. So thinking fuel oil, it would be the most common one at a big complex like this if it were being used for heating as a source of fuel for heating systems. Based on the records that have been shared with us to date, that is not the intent of the project. There's no other, potential property use associated with that where you have a lot of hazardous material or risky property use. There's no auto repair. There's no solid waste disposal, things like that that could bring other things onto the site that could be a vulnerability to the wells. So you're looking at big picture land use and facility use potential impacts. When it comes to things such as stormwater, that is going to be a rather healthy component of the site development plans that will be subject to both local, state, and technically through the MS4 permit federal requirements for the school project and as well as other projects that disturb more than an acre of fall into the construction general permits. So there's a fair amount of oversight on the stormwater front, and also with the town enacting new bylaws for the stormwater at this most recent annual town meeting, there is increased requirements being put on both public and private projects in town. So stormwater management is something that will be addressed, and there's best management practices to allow for groundwater recharge, but also treatment of that stormwater from a future project development. So that is where we get to the idea of saying there's no significant impacts from the project as the records were shared with us.
At this phase, it's pretty common to have that sort of conclusion drawn as the design is not advanced. But as the design advances, things are proposed specifically for stormwater treatment. Are you, as the Board of Water and Sewer, Mo, are you comfortable that all of these potential minor impacts would be identified and mitigated?
I think rigorous reviews of everything that comes in for the final, what we have for information so far to us is still to us is conceptual. Nothing's been finalized, nothing's been, so it's hard to come up, we have really no kind of opinion on anything until that comes in. So again, that goes to rigorous reviews, goes to water and sewer board discussions to see what impacts. But from the information that we were going off of preliminary, that was, with environmental partners, there was no serious impact at the time.
But as the design development continues, it gets more refined and any minor potential impacts are identified and mitigated. Right? That's sort of the intent of the permitting. Design development.
And that's our expectation is that as well.
And just so we're all clear about this, there's nothing that we would design differently for this project because of its current condition than we would if it were up on hospital Hill. That's outside of that potential. The bylaws as they're written only require us to meet current Mass DEP codes and regulations, which we would have to do for hospital Hill. So there are no special requirements pertinent to our bylaws or state regulations that require this to be treated any differently because of its location.
The nature of this development isn't unique such that it has a potential impact to stormwater.
And I believe, and I won't speak for Bill and his group, but I believe that's why the bylaws were written the way they are, because it's going to be a safe use.
The contractor would be responsible post and pre and post development of the stormwater. So
Would be required to file the NIPD's permit and the stormwater pollution protection plan, which is standard of practice for any project of this size. All that stuff gets submitted, that's part of the permitting process.
Sarah, did you want to say anything? I saw you turn the video on, or were you just? No.
No, thank you.
Maybe we could, unless there are any more questions on that, maybe we could turn to the second broad topic, which is sort of the existing conditions of what's happening today. on this site.
Everything, and all stormwater right now is currently just washing right off into the ground. There's no stormwater system up there.
So there are some drains, I think, in some.
Area drains, I mean, I don't know.
Where do they go?
they do go out to wetlands, different wetlands in the area. So with our MS4 permit, we are required to look for illicit discharge. We look at all our outfalls, we sample them, we test them for any kind of chemicals that are present that we have to report to DEP yearly. That's going to be probably get more and more strict as we move forward. At MS4 permit, I think that you'll see us to have to kind of push the envelope to have these kind of systems be probably filtered and cleaned. But that takes money, that takes time, that takes money. So that's going to be coming up in the future, but right now it's more that we have to be where all of our outfalls are, where everything's coming from. If we do find an illicit discharge, if we do find something that's out of the ordinary, we have to trace that back and what our findings.
But basically, there's no modern day
There's no control.
stormwater management system there in place up there. So what's happening today is probably say that it's not the best practice, right? It's not.
No, we would not be able to build a project like that today, the way it's currently designed.
Anything that's modified from this point forward, anything that's modified or new has to follow.
And we would follow the new regulations we passed in town meeting. This project would be subject to the correct.
So can I ask a question? So what is being done in the proposed project? The difference and as it corrects. So because there's been some discussion saying it doesn't need to be done because actually the ground's the best filter system like that. So.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm paraphrasing, but I've heard those comments.
Some people have said, like, on Saturdays, people park on the grass.
Yes.
Right? Some people say that that's okay. It's better than actually parking.
Right. So what I'll do is I'm gonna turn it over to Mitch and just sort of maybe Sandy or Mark probably even, you can talk about what this project is adding in terms of the stormwater runoff to protect the groundwater that doesn't exist today.
Sure. I'm just going to kind of keep it on a higher level, then Mark will talk about the specific project. So I think one way we can explain what the existing drainage is, it's a collection system. It collects and discharges. You look at the history of stormwater, and I'm not going to bore you with the history of it, but it's very much a product of its time, where you collect it and get it to the discharge point as fast as possible. That's it. Nothing else happens with it. It's purely a collection system. Today's system, based on, you heard that Eric talked about some of the standards that are now, some of the bylaws that are changing. There's also further changes coming on the state level dealing with the stormwater standards. So there's been a lot of changes in the last 5 years, and there's going to be some more changes. So obviously we keep up to date with all of the kind of the latest technology, the latest impacts of climate change, all of those things to make sure that when we design a drainage system, it's not designed for today, but moving forward. And so what happens is that we start to look at the site a little bit differently than they looked at it 40, 50, 60 years ago. And that is that you try to decentralize your systems, you try to spread it out. And when you do have good soils like this site, you try to infiltrate it. There's a whole set of criteria that you have to follow when you put water into the ground. And one of the key things that everyone should be aware of is that we have to do water quality treatment of the stormwater runoff. And basically we're trying to take all the solids, all the pollutants connect to the solids, and we're removing those before we infiltrate it into the ground. So before you can put anything into the ground for recharge, we're doing different measures to treat that water. So you can collect it in a pipe and put it into a water quality structure. Then it goes in infiltration. You can do a bioretention or something called, or you might know it as a rain garden. And that's basically just a filter system where the water comes into a low area. It's not meant to be for the big storms. It's meant for water quality. You filter through a media system. And then when it gets to the bottom of that system, you're still a couple of feet above the groundwater elevation or the seasonal high groundwater elevation. And even that gives you additional treatment as it goes through the soil. So there's very much a prescribed process of doing water quality treatment. And so that's going to be key part to this. I think, as already been mentioned, we're doing schematic design. We have a conceptual approach, and part of that conceptual approach is the water quality component. And then the other aspect of that is the volume and just what happens in large storms. But I'm just going to end with kind of the water quality. There's a whole process. All of the impervious areas on the site will be directed to some sort of water quality. And when it goes into any kind of infiltration system, it will already have been treated prior to going into that system. And then you get even more treatment as it exfiltrates from the bottom of the system through an additional layer of soil before it even gets to this, kind of the surface groundwater, which is higher than what you would see for a well in that groundwater aquifer too. So there's a whole series of steps, and from what's there now to what's going to be there is night and day. 30 years as an engineer, I used to do the stuff back in the 80s where we didn't do a lot, and it has changed a lot in 30 years. Mark, I don't know if you want to just hit a couple of the actual systems that are being used on this site on the conceptual level.
Oh, yeah. So on the conceptual level, with this site, you're going from that pre-existing conditions, the paved conditions, to runoff to catch basins out to wetlands. And now with the future conditions with the site, you'd be looking at those paved conditions being captured, having deep sump-hooded catch basins, which are part of a best management practices treatment train, the very beginning of it. Going to, on this project, we have hydrodynamic separators that help take the water, trap the sediment within it, and allow the water to continue further on the line to infiltration systems. We have a rain garden on this project, pretty substantially sized rain garden on this project as well. So all of these tools that DEP provides as recommendations for treatment trains, these are a few of them that we've proposed on this project so far.
So really, in essence, like after the, the implementation of the stormwater management system, the water is gonna be much cleaner going into, because it's treated, all the suspended solids are being taken out, so it's really like a cleaner water that's
And
going
it
back
is.
into our
It'll
groundwater
be
that's
an
going in
improvement.
now, yeah.
And we're not, the other question I had is that, there's, the development calls for a lot more impervious surface than there now, right? So in terms of the quantity of water that's getting today, that's getting recharged, compared to, you put all this impervious surface in. Is there a difference there, or are these systems designed to sort of neutralize that?
Yeah, I'll touch on that and then I'll hand it over to Mitch, but basically we're required to not significantly increase or decrease water that's being shed from the site. So site that's landing on, water that's landing on the site, as much as possible is being recharged to it. So I don't know, Sandy or Mark, if you want to touch base on that topic, on overall quantity of recharge.
Sure. As far as like the water quality component of it, yes, we're adding pavement areas, which is probably your main, producer of potential contaminants on the site. You have a new roof, which has a lower potential for contaminants because it's really just getting the atmospheric deposition, unlike a parking lot. But the regulations we're following not only applies to the new surfaces, it applies to the old surfaces. So we're going to get a delta improvement from the previous untreated, runoff, plus we're treating all of the new runoff. I don't know, Mark, if you got anything to add to that.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Sandy.
But could you also touch on just, the quantity aspect? Like we're not significantly decreasing water on site by, putting it into the sewer or something like that. Can you touch on that?
Correct. The water quantity on site is handled and staying with this project on site. We do have, discharges, like you said, that exist today to the wetlands that will, continue to the wetlands in the future condition, but will be treated and mitigated so that it doesn't increase from what is there in the current condition.
I think one thing that should be pointed out is that we're very fortunate on this site to have good soils where we can actually recharge. Trust me, having done a lot of different sites and a lot of schools, whenever we have a site with what's called either A or B soils, which is a sandy, more gravelly soil that drains well, it really is an advantage of being able to capture and retain a portion of the stormwater. So it's, to Mark's point, yes, we whenever we're dealing with the wetlands, there's two things. I sit on my Concom, there's two things. You don't want to dry them out and you don't want to flood them, which means we want to match existing to post conditions. So we maintain the wetlands as they are now. So we will be looking at those specific discharges. And in some cases, we'll actually make sure that we have water going to those wetlands so we don't alter the existing conditions of those wetlands.
Steve, you have your little hand up?
Yeah. Hi there. I'm a little, I feel a little bit like when Congress asks questions about social media, so I risk asking something kind of stupid, but what I'm wondering, this has come up a couple times through the Board of Health where there were measures put in place to deal with the infiltration as you're describing, with catch basins or special kinds of blacktop that I guess are permeable and so forth. And one of the things that I've wondered about is that in some sense, there's the issues of whether it's designed and built according to those specifications, but sometimes it seems like it's not always clear to me, how do you make sure that the systems continue to operate the way they're intended, or 5 years later, they don't repave the blacktop with non-permeable blacktop or that sort of thing? Like, how much work does it take to make sure these systems, which I gather are largely kind of passive systems, continue to function as we had hoped them to? Over.
That's a great question, Dr. Resch. I actually appreciate that question. Part of the project and part of the permitting process actually governs what are called O&Ms, or operation and maintenance manuals, so that there will be specific conditions that must be met for operations and maintenance of the site as part of the approval process through the permitting through CONSCOM, through planning board. That's all something that can be specifically put into those conditions. So, but that's an excellent point. They'll have to put together a maintenance plan that states that every so often they inspect the structures, every so often they replace filters or whatever. Every so often they are, checking the outfalls. All of those things would be written into the operations and maintenance manuals.
And one other thing I would add is that, we do a lot of work for a lot of different clients. We always look at what the capabilities are of the client we're designing for. So when we're working with the town, we know they have certain, assets and certain constraints. So there are certain kind of best management practice maybe we do at a college that has, people there all the time versus, a high school or a public school where we know we have to understand what constraints they have for maintenance. No question, whether you're talking about the existing system out there now or any kind of future systems, it does require maintenance. And we try to be very aware of, who's performing that maintenance and what the capabilities of the owners are to make sure we align those. Hey, we can do really elaborate, stormwater systems, but we have to make sure it makes sense. It's going to work, and it's not going to work just tomorrow when it's, first built, but that there is a reasonable maintenance and operation and maintenance plan for it. So I don't think there'll be any permeable material, porous pavement on this site.
Right. Thanks.
So does
Thanks a lot.
that fall on you?
It sounds like me right now.
Yeah.
And whether Mo likes it or not, he'll be intimately involved. Like, he'll have his review before we even get to permitting and say, look, if you're going to be charged with maintaining these systems, we want to make sure he understands and has input into them. So that's sort of the next stage of design as we get into more details about which specific systems are being put, which manufacturers are being, put on the approved manufacturing list as far as specifications. And so Amy Colleran, Mo, all going to be intimately part of that discussion.
So it's not necessarily like maintenance staff that work for the school. It's more
I
your
think
department.
it's a combination of whether or not it falls under stormwater management under DPW or it's contracted by the school.
Yeah, and there's a combination of some landscape kind of type of maintenance versus, cleaning out the actual structures and so forth. And again, we want to make sure we communicate it with the owner, in this case, the town, to make sure that we're doing appropriate measures so that they can be maintained in the long term. And I would also say most likely that the town departments are now very familiar with all of the type of systems and water quality systems we're going to be putting into this site.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to flag that Jeff Kane, who's an associate member of the Board of Health, is in the attendees, and he wanted to come over and ask something, I think. Thank you very much.
You guys hear me?
Yep. Sorry, Jeff.
Sorry, I got the invite late, so I apologize for jumping in kind of last minute here. But I do want to go back and talk a little bit on the water quality issues with the stormwater. It was touched on. The biggest issue I see here, as far as the Board of Health issues standpoint, is that we're proposing to locate the school on top of a right where our most important drinking water aquifer is now. And that aquifer is located only about 50 feet, at least a well set 50 feet below ground in a gravel pack well. A 50-foot aquifer overlaid by sandy soil is very permeable. And as you touched on, you're looking to discharge that stormwater into the infiltration areas on site. The concern isn't the treatment with the DEP. I mean, that's mostly TSS and grease removal. The bigger concern would be the pollutant runoff from parking lots, like the heavy metals that we're concerned with, and their introduction into a very shallow aquifer situation, and the potential for that to migrate down into our aquifer. Maybe we could speak a little bit on that, because I see that being a bigger issue than just the regular TSS removal DEP typically has.
Yeah, so again, I mean, you understand that, you know, the whole goal of getting reducing the total suspended solids is that you're actually also reducing, you know, the pollutants that attach to them. There are certain pollutants, one that, you know, when we go through the permitting, my guess is that it'll be brought up, which is salting of this particular site, and how much that's going to be allowed, and what potential alternatives there are, because that's soluble. And so you know, it's pretty straightforward that that is not going to get collected in a water quality structure. The good news about, well, not that it's good news, but some of the other potential pollutants from the, you know, from the different impervious surfaces, and more specifically with the, you know, parking areas, is that if it's going to the bioretention, you definitely have a more opportunity to have a more robust filtration system and uptake through the plants. Now, DEP does not take credit for any of that. We cannot take credit for that. The regulations are written in such a way that we have to meet certain standards with TSS. But the more you can decentralize, the more you can have, you know, surface contact between the runoff and vegetated areas, that all plays into a more robust treatment system.
Yeah, and again, some you're talking about the bioretention, some of the plants would have some heavy metal uptake, but the more concerning ones are the lead, the zinc, things like that, that aren't typically uptaked in the plants. I don't see enough data on exactly how far those could permeate through a sand and gravel medium that we have. The biggest concern is obviously the shallow depth to this groundwater. A 50-foot well point is very shallow for a municipal well. And test pits and the soil maps in the area do show this entire area is still A soils. So, you know, and there is still the potential for lead, and Massachusetts is one of the few states that still allow lead paint to be, lead weights to be used as wheel balancing, though they recommend not to, but that is still out there. So, I mean, there has to be I think a more robust way of ensuring that we don't have these very important aquifers polluted, because it's very hard to unring that bell. Now, we have the issue of potential spills. Now, I don't know exactly what is going to be arriving on that site potentially, but any spills that hit that ground is going to, depending on the viscosity of the fluid, it's going to be permeating through that material very rapidly as well.
Yeah, so a couple of things on what you're asking about and what you're looking for the project to do. And I think, you know, as a design professional, you know, we look to the regulations, we look to, you know, best management practices, we look to professional standards. And so when I hear things like, you know, we have to ensure that everything is with, you know, removed from the runoff. That's not a realistic approach. We need to have certain guidelines to meet, and we will meet those as far as the state goes. I understand the question, and I understand that, you know, we need to be very aware of it. We know we're in a recharge area, which means you can do some higher treatment levels, but I think we need to, you know, get more specific. If you're talking about, you know, lead or zinc or so forth, you know, what are we actually talking about, the loads? And that's where I would go with this. As far as like the design and so forth, we need to be in the real world, and we need to be looking at this site and what is actually the pollutant load. So we're at a school. So we're looking at a school that will be, you know, powered by electricity. So that's a good thing. You don't have, you know, large oil tanks in the ground and so forth. So you have a reduction of that. We don't have a gas pump on site. So you're reducing that. So those are all the different types of things, but we have to be practical about how we approach things, but with always an eye to where we are and what we're trying to protect. So I totally understand your questions, but we have to come look at the regulations and what the requirements are and what is it that we should be doing to, protect that aquifer. Because this isn't the only site that's going to be developed in this, recharge area. And so that's why we look at the regulations so closely.
I have a question for Sandy, I guess. You've worked on, you've been in stormwater management for a long time, worked on a lot of different projects. In your professional opinion, when you look at what's trying to be done with this project from stormwater management system, on a scale of like 1 to 10, with 1 being sort of, this is not complicated, it's easy, done this before, and 10 being like very complicated, sort of high risk, where do you see this project falling?
Sure. So no, that's a great question. And it kind of puts it into the context. So when I look at the use on this site, so you're looking at the use and you're looking at all the different components for a school site. So that's probably a fairly low, potential for significant pollutants. That would be more of an industrial sites. Those would be your 7, 8, 9s, and 10s. However, having said that, we are definitely going to have a lot of, potential traffic through buses and cars and so forth. So that's what, we're really going to concentrate on, that's what we want to protect. And that's what the regulations are trying to protect, everywhere from the MS4 and those recent changes to those regulations to what the state has for the stormwater standards. I happen to be on the stormwater advisory group for the state and for DEP in reviewing those regulations. I know which direction they're going in, and all of those are very positive, not to mention climate change and everything else. I look at this site, I look at the soils, I look at the fact that you're talking about a site that has little to no water quality on it now, and you're doing a pretty significant improvement. So I look at that as very positive, but you are close to some public drinking wells. So I'd probably, just to use your kind of scale, it's a 5 or 6. It's not a layup, but it's not something that's extremely difficult based on, the type of use that's going on the site. But it is something we have to look at. Fairly confident based on the number of sites that we do, the schools that we do. I think these are all good questions. I think the questions on the maintenance, those are really good to bring up now, because everyone has to understand that all these things have to be maintained for them to continue to work. I get a little excited for the same reason that Jeff Kane is getting a little bit nervous about the site, is the soils, because we have more flexibility. And I always look to nature as the example of how to best treat water, because it does a hell of a job. And I'm sorry for the interruption there. But I don't know. I hopefully that answers your question. I have a pretty high confidence on this site, but we have to make sure we pay attention. And I think everyone else here, needs to continue to ask these questions.
Yes, Sandy, just let me expand on that a little bit. Yeah, I understand. I completely agree with you that as far as the design of the site to meet any of the regulations that are out there right now, it's pretty straightforward. You have a lot of area, you have highly permeable soils. You could easily check every box on the DEP stormwater checklist. As a town and as the Board of Health, we look at those 2 wells out there, 3 and 4, being the highest yield wells we have. They're also being expanded as we speak. We have no emergency measures in place, either through agreement or through physical connections. If something was to happen to our groundwater, we don't have backup. So we have to take that into account, that even potential above and beyond what you would typically design for in a stormwater system, it has to be looked at. Because if something does happen via spill during construction, during running of this, with runoff from cars and pollutants, that obviously are going to come from the increased parking, increased traffic on the site. we don't get the chance to unring that bell. And we, as a town, don't want to be the litmus case for how pollutants travel through highly permeable soils to shallow aquifers. We don't have a chance to go backwards, so.
Yeah. There are some very simple things that we can incorporate into our drainage system that addresses some of your concerns. The one that I have done probably most often is to look at areas of the site where you potentially, for whatever reason, could have a spill. And the first thing you do is you put in basically a control on the local drainage so that you have the ability to shut it off, meaning you can close off a drain pipe so that that if you do have a spill, you can control it.
Yeah, absolutely. I see the check valves they put in. You could put in just a regular hand turned valve.
Yep. I mean, this is basic. So there are.
But again, we have to know that people are trained to do it and that valve
Absolutely.
is maintained and that it's going to turn if it needs to turn.
Right.
And people know where that is. So my bigger concern would be any pollutants transporting into the groundwater.
Right.
You know, and like you said, this site is going to have to infiltrate just about everything above the existing conditions that we're putting in there. And that's going to be some fairly large areas of parking and, you know, idling cars and everything else. So the potential for those pollutants that aren't taken up by the soil, aren't taken up by any plants in a bioretention area, transporting to the groundwater, I think it still really has to be looked at.
Oh, understood. And I think, you know, again, to the point that we're still at schematic design, more at the conceptual level, there's definitely a lot of different options out there to look at that. And I think that would have to be a conversation with the designers, but also the town, in making sure that whatever is proposed is correct for this site and correct for the protection that you're looking for, and not just to throw a lot of other things at it, but you want to be thoughtful and look at this site specifically. And, you know, I'm an engineer through and through, and I can immediately come up with 3 different things to do, but without studying it, without, you know, really vetting it through, is this really what's going to be done? I'm not going to like say we could take care of everything, but you can definitely do some thoughtful enhancements without dramatically changing the approach to stormwater. And yes, we would be above regulations, but I think that's the conversation that we need to have with the town.
Yeah, and I agree. And as an engineer myself, I also know we can design it and we can make it look good on paper, but the real world implementation has to be realistic as well.
It has to be logical, and it has to have common sense behind it.
Carol, did you have a question? I see your hands up.
Thank you. Traditionally, I'm just referring to the fact that I've been on the Board of Health 4 years, and anytime we have any, with our stormwater regulations, we have, as you all know, a consultant who does an examination and many meetings and a letter of conditions. So for our clarification, for my own, I couldn't really see, but one of you in the in-person audience said you've taken into consideration all the requirements, the regulations in the town and the state. Has there been, and forgive me because I feel like we're kind of new to this whole process, has there been a review, as Sandy's referring to, based on our Board of Health stormwater regs, what this schematic design would need to be in compliance, so that upfront we're aware of that? That's really my question. I hope I'm being clear. And forgive me because I'm new to the whole process. But since Steve was invited and we're talking as Board of Health, I'm thinking, is there already, has there been, or as you referred to, Sandy, you're at schematic, so not yet?
So typically, and Mark can jump in on this. So typically, yes, you know, we're going to be looking at the different regulations. We also look at local bylaws, Board of Health. I mean, depending upon, as you know, each town is a little bit different in how their regulations are set up, and who actually has regulations specifically dealing with stormwater, and it varies from town to town. So we take a look at those regulations up front. I'll give you one quick example. State does not, a state requires you to approximate, recharge volume. But you can always discharge a greater volume of water. Some towns are very specific to say you cannot discharge offsite in any increase in volume. So there's always a lot of little things within the local requirements that we try to go through. And again, once we get out a schematic and the project begins to move forward, that's when we start having sit downs with the various boards and so forth and commissions, just to make sure we're making sure that we have read the regulations, but we understand and how they're implemented. And yeah, I've worked in a lot of different towns, and it does vary. We kind of have our own kind of standard level, but yeah, we have to be very aware of local home rule and every town has a different perspective in what they're trying to protect. So we just respect that and go through that process. I don't know, Mark, if you want to add anything.
Not much more to add to that other than, as part of the due diligence process in the schematic design, we did sit down and take a look at the regulations and making sure that when we put pen to paper for the schematic design, that we have something that we can work with that will meet the local regulations as well as the state.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're trying to do during schematics is set up so that we, provide a scope for the stormwater system that will be then budgeted so that we can have the ability to make sure that we're meeting all those requirements.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Raj, did you have a question?
I have a question about benchmarks. I know that if you're building a levee, sometimes they say, oh, well, we're going to build it high enough that it can withstand a 100-year flood event or something like that. And some of the discussion you've been having, it seems like there are probably townspeople that are particularly concerned about sort of the risk related to our drinking water being nearby to the site. And are there benchmarks in terms of the amount of punishment the land can withstand, or the amount of risk? Like I imagine, like if someone spills a gallon of gasoline in that parking lot, there's enough to absorb that without destroying Medfield's water supply. But if there was 10,000 gallons, it probably would be a problem. So do you think about it in that level of the severity of the event that would be a problem?
So there's certain components within the stormwater system that there's built-in capacity for that. But your question about is 3 gallons fine, but is 300 gallons a disaster? We don't, so first, before you get even to that, I think there's a whole nother discussion that has to be had with the operations of the school, because the last thing you want to do is have 3 gallons, or certainly don't want 300 gallons. And some of that is, it sounds kind of minor, but it's having good housekeeping practices. And that's part of, protecting yourself from spills and so forth. But it's also understanding what you do. Like when we look at the SWIP and we look at I should probably say Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, and that's done for construction. In that plan for the contractor, they have to have spill kits on site because they have to respond to that if something happens. So there's that kind of operational component of that, which is probably as important or maybe more important than having extra capacity, in a stormwater catch basin for that 300 gallons. Yes, you have hoods, and oil, if it's, a small amount, is going to float in it, and hopefully it'll be, removed when they clean the catch basins. But beyond that, I want to make sure on the operations, we do a very good job during construction on that, because it's a requirement in the construction documents. I think it's just, that's more just a discussion with the town and the school and so forth. And I'm sure we haven't had these discussions yet. But their facilities people have a good handle on it. They do not want a big problem either. So it's maybe just more communication than anything else.
And Steve, we typically design with a spill plan, 200% capacity, the largest potential tank spill on site, which in this case might be a school bus or something like that. I'm not sure what else would be making deliveries or what's the heating of the school. I assume it's not oil anymore.
It's electric is for the
Yeah,
heating
so,
for
I
the
mean,
school.
probably a school bus or some type of delivery vehicle is going to have the largest volume coming onto that site.
Yeah.
Any site. I mean, we can have the same discussion wherever that school is located. Same discussion. Right.
Yeah, it's partly where it is now, that's an active, that's a primary active.
This is about 2/3 of Medfield. Most of Medfield is protection.
Do you have one more topic? We good with that topic?
Well,
More
we've
questions on that topic?
gone into the
We
last.
kind
topic.
of went into the last topic.
But I think the best laid plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, you know what, you sort of touched on this, but, you know, I was sort of interested, maybe lay people like me are more interested in this too. How rain gardens work, and what's sort of the, you know, why are they important? What's the, you know, benefit of it?
Sure. So rain gardens are typically a nature-based system, and it's really just a vertical filter. You have a sand-based growing media with the vegetation in it, so that the water is directed towards those, whether they're called a rain garden or bioretention. And really, the only difference between a rain garden and a bioretention is under the regulations, so it has to meet certain standards. But you direct surface water to that bioretention, and then it will actually seep through that, growing media, which is a sand base with, topsoil and other type of components. And then as it filters through that, there's another a few layers underneath that. The thing about whether it's a rain garden or bioretention, it's very flexible. It is a great tool. It is probably the thing that we do most for water quality. And the reason why it's a great tool is that we can line it if there's a reason that we want to line it, so we could just get the treatment, or we can have it unlined, so it just goes through and we have exfiltration. Sometimes we have under drains underneath it. So there's depending upon the conditions, you kind of change your design based on that. But there is some parameters about the filtration through that soil, that media, so that you get the treatment, you get that filtration from any pollutants. Also in, state DEP, you have to do pre-treatment. So there's a certain amount of gross total suspended solids you have to remove before it gets there. But there's some really other benefits that we, quote, don't take credit for, because it is a nature-based system. It's very flexible. You can have all sorts of landscape designs. It can be formal, it can be informal, it can be looking very natural. So it's a great workhorse for us. And it really has a lot more benefits that we get to take credit for, because it is a nature-based system.
And is the thought that the stormwater from the parking lots sort of goes into the center where the rain garden is? Is that the design, at the schematic design level?
Sure. Typically, what you size it for is a relatively small storm, because the small storms is where you get all the pollutant runoff, or the beginning of a larger storm. So that goes into that bioretention. And typically we're doing surface runoff, because bioretentions tend to be very shallow. So you just have overland flow to them. It's standard to have in your bioretention overflows, because even though we're just really collecting the first inch and a half, maybe 2 inches of rainfall to treat it, we have to make sure we can accommodate a large storm. So typically you'll see some area drains or some catch basins in those bioretentions, and they're actually set up so that you can have the first kind of flush of water come in, get treated, and then if it's a really large storm, that water has someplace to go, which is, builds up and goes into a catch basin or area drain, and then it goes through the system, because it's really about that first amount of runoff from your parking lot. Just think about it. If you go off the hose, someone's cleaning it, it's that first flush coming off the parking lot. That's probably, let's just say, the dirtiest. And that's what we're trying to capture, and we're trying to treat But they also will be designed to accommodate even a 100-year storm. So isn't stormwater fun? Can I go into the history of stormwater now?
Good, but now again, even with the rain gardens, again, that checks the box as far as.
That's gonna take a whole other night, Sam. But I noticed you mentioned you were on the
That does check the box for treatment of the stormwater, but we do lose effectiveness in the winter. And, again, we got to make sure it's located in areas that you're not going to get snow plowed into it, stored on there. And you got to make sure that obviously those plants are going to be acceptable
Right.
for the type of dry environment that's going to be there most of the time.
So no, that there is a consideration for the design. The first thing is, no, you can't put snow on it. Compaction is the enemy of bioretention. So you do not want to put big piles of snow. And usually, through these processes, we end up having a plan that shows where the snow, storage should be. So you don't want to do that. And then there's some great research from UNH about bioretention and the fact that you don't get the same type of freeze that you have in typical topsoil, and there's actually still somewhat porous. It does have a decline in the efficiency, but it doesn't go to zero. So yeah, that stuff is happy to kind of share that information with you, because there's some great research on the effectiveness of the bioretention, even in cold weather climates, which we are a part of.
Right. And that's what we're just saying, obviously that's going to check that box. But as you mentioned, there is a decline in efficiency, but, either way, it's still going to check the box that it's going to be okay. So, but the big concern is still, we have to protect that groundwater. Big picture
Yes.
beyond just checking the boxes.
I understand that. Yes.
Well, you mentioned that you were on the Mass DEP Stormwater
Advisory group. Yeah.
and
So I happen to be the representative of MACC.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard you right, but I thought I heard you say there was sort of some good news coming. I don't know what you meant by good news,
So anyways, I mean, obviously I'm representing the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissioners, so I have a perspective when I'm representing them. And generally, it's the evolving science of stormwater. It's really the big change for the state where they're going is to match up with the MS4 requirements, which I think you heard Eric talk about earlier. So the MS4 is through the EPA. That's more of what the town has a permit for, and they have to meet certain criteria. So DEP is doing a few things, and the key thing that they're looking to do with the anticipated regulation changes is to align the stormwater standards with the new MS4 standards. One quick one, for water quality, MS4 is 90%. So for phosphorus and total phosphorus, I'm getting, or 60% for total phosphorus, but they're getting in line so that you don't have two different competing regulations. There's also a lot in there surrounding rainfall data. Under the Wetlands Protection Act, we're still under 60-year-old rainfall data. Almost all engineers use more recent stuff, but there's a lot of changes coming as far as requirements under the state and under the Wetlands Protection Act.
So it sounds like whatever we do up there, it's gonna better protect our wells going forward.
Absolutely, and as a consultant, we watched what happened with the regulations. So the way the regulations will come about is that you'll have a review, a public comment period, and then DEP's already said they'll implement the regulations 6 months after the comment period. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at designs, that is there a potential that we fall underneath the new designs, and which part of those new designs should we be designing towards, so to protect you and our clients.
Does anybody have any other questions?
And is your goal to have the existing school on site also meet all the current requirements that we have now, or just a redesign type to the extent practical standard?
Now, typically, the way the regulations are written, there is, based on what we're doing, unless there's some small piece of the site that we can't do it with, we're looking to bring the entire site in compliance. Mark, there's no real areas that we can't do that with, correct?
So you'd be adding a lot more infiltration areas then in that site?
But there are several infiltration areas around the site with that decentralized approach. North, south, east, and west of that site, there's numerous infiltration areas.
Right.
Yeah.
So you'd be adding more to that to have the current school meet the standards as well?
So we'd move, yeah, for the current standards is that we would meet water quality for the existing, but we're not going to mitigate volume and rate back to a wooded site. But the water quality, we would do the entire site.
Mm-hmm.
But
Is anybody thirsty? Okay, all right, well then I think we're good. And so, see, I know.
Wicked easy.
I know, well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I feel bad, Larry and Tina, you didn't say anything, but you spent your evening with us, so I don't know if you want to, sing a song or, I know. I really appreciate you guys being here, and if you have anything to add.
I will mention one thing. I think, Carol, your question, and I couldn't quite sure whether we heard it right or we answered it. So the drainage system for both the new school and the existing school has been designed in concept. It has been shown in sort of preliminary layouts in the drawings and the specifications. The final details, which I think Mark was talking about, have not yet been finalized and confirmed with the Concom and site planning commission, anybody else. So there's still work to be done, but in general, the system has been thought through, designed, and shown in the drawings, and therefore built into the price that we've developed for the project.
Thank you.
Well, then, I'll let you guys all, we're gonna stay for one more minute so we can approve some minutes. It's really exciting.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
coming.
Have a good evening.
Enjoy.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll see you again.
I'm sure. Okay, so, that was really good. It's good.
Yeah.
Good information.
Sandy's very expensive.
Oh, yeah, Sandy was great. Yeah, I thought so too. Okay, so we had approved last time the minutes from the 9/23 meeting, the future of Dale. And Jess Riley very nicely pointed out that we forgot to include her as attendee. So, but we listed her later, and so I went back to make sure we got everybody, and I noticed that Anna Mae was here too. So the only edits to those minutes are to add Jess and Anna Mae as attendees, and then make sure that proper spelling was throughout. So that was the only change. So I'd like to entertain a motion to accept those amended minutes from 9/23.
So,
Okay, and so we'll just go around. Jerry?
Yes.
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 And Amanda?
Yes.
Oh, you were, there you go. Okay, all right, so that passes, and then we had minutes from 9/29 that Jill did most of, and I typed in a little bit, but. Does anybody have any questions on those minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry about this. It's new to me, so I'm like trying to, I don't want to miss anything. No, you did a great job. Okay.
Puts the rider for
I guess, whatever. That's all right. All right, so I guess I'll entertain a motion to accept the 9/29 minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, let's go around.
Yes.
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 And Amanda?
I was not there.
Oh, you were not there, so you're abstaining. Okay, so then I'm a yes. And then we have, did people see Newton's minutes that he sent around?
I did.
Can someone remind me of the date?
October 4th.
Thank you. The October 4th minutes. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I'd like to add the link to our Q&A.
Oh, okay. So,
But I'll get that from you.
I'll get,
That's-
yes,
that's-
yes. Yeah, I actually think that for that, the meeting materials that Nick posted in advance has the full Q&A in it, in the
Oh.
meeting materials.
Yeah, actually, it's in the agenda.
Yeah, he attached it to the agenda.
The agenda for that meeting.
Okay.
And we'll have a final version of that for this week, but yeah, that was attached to the agenda. Okay. Then I guess I'll entertain a motion for the October 4th minutes.
Motion to approve.
All right, okay. Look at that, Amanda jumping in.
It was quiet in there. I was like, okay, I'll talk.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let you vote first then too.
Oh, I say yes.
Okay, all right. So-
Yes.
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 Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, cool. So that's all I have for tonight, Thursday. And so I apologize that we're having 2 in 1 week, but here I was thinking subcommittee meetings, not everybody was gonna come to, but they've become so popular that we all come. So, so on Thursday, we're not going to make us all feel like we need to drink a bottle of water and fall asleep. We're not gonna read the Q&A anymore. So distribute that final version, and then, but we are gonna go through kind of answers through some presentations and things like that, and I thought that it would be good to go through just a little bit of a recap of what everybody has done, because I think that that will probably be a better use of our time, because I think we haven't really had a chance to kind of like talk and debrief on the different work that everybody's done. And then I have a meeting tomorrow with Christine and Scott McDermott to kind of talk about how everything else is gonna go. So I'll have information on that on Thursday. So we can talk about the warrant hearing and the vote meeting. And then Scott is planning on coming up to the warrant hearing to talk to the town about how the town meeting is gonna go. And so I'll have more clarity on that. So we can talk about that on Thursday too. Okay. Anybody have anything else?
Can you just kind of go over this email you sent out? Just so it could-
Oh, yeah,
just
so-
Thursday, could it be good?
So my thought for Thursday is, so when we went into this, we kind of, what did we have, like 6 or 7 different areas that people were researching. What I would like to do is kind of recap. And so there's been kind of, I feel like there's been a lot of like questions, like, is there a good way to summarize X or something like that? So like as an example, I have been working on putting something together that talks about the traffic and the sidewalks and the busing kind of all as one. And then Steve has been working on one that has to do with pulling all the different cost pieces together. And some of that is in relation to answering some of the specific questions in the Q&As. I think that some of the things that are on that list, like one of them was like, what's the MSBA process? And you're like, Ed and I had chatted, like, there's just that kind of like that one sheet that we had pointed out to. So some of it might be as simple as, well, we had found this one pager on the MSBA process, and maybe we don't want to talk about that more. I think we'll probably end up having more robust discussions about cost and probably, about the traffic and the sidewalks. And if we want to recap any of this stuff from water, I kind of leave it to all of you as to what you want to kind of discuss and talk about. I'm not asking anybody to create a presentation, George, just talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, but and as I said, when we first met 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And just talked about the subcommittee concept.
Yeah.
I think that what we agreed on was these were the highlighted areas at the time.
Yeah.
Right, and then from which they
It's
really
kind of ballooned,
expanded, right?
yeah.
And as you mentioned, well, I think it's great, frankly. So I think it's right, like, we talk about, the safety issue, all of these have been discussed very robustly, I think.
Yeah.
So if there are, so I like the idea of this, I think what you just said, which was, these are the items that we should be able to at least check off. And are there any lingering questions?
That's really kind of like, I want to
Right.
make sure
Make it a
that all of
dialogue.
us don't have any lingering questions, and if we do, kind of talk through them, because really at this point, we have Thursday, and then if we all actually don't want to meet next week, which I find very appealing, I don't know about the rest of you, but, so if we actually don't meet the next week, really, then we have the warrant hearing where we're letting people talk to us. My thought about that is it's not really a place for people to ask us more questions because they've already had the opportunity to do that. This is more of, let's hear from everybody we haven't had a chance to hear from. So if you weren't part of one of our conversations or constituent groups or all that, like, come and talk to us. And then anybody that was a part of those that wants to come talk to us again, like, that's fine, but it's more of like, we're absorbing what they have to say. You know, what are they thinking about? What's important to them? What are their opinions? And give everyone a chance to hear from us, or for us to hear from them. I guess is
So
what I'm trying to say.
how, I agree, and I think that just having that week to formulate some thoughts is probably best for me.
Yeah.
Is so that if in our conversation on Thursday, we could highlight some things that might show where some open questions are, or, you know, or question in my own mind, but we could follow up individually saying, okay, this is the expert on this,
Yeah.
on the bond, you know, I have a question, go to Ed,
Yeah.
rather than having to do that, and then over the course of that week, just formulate something.
Mhm.
But the question I would ask is, in that context is, how do you anticipate the public hearing to be conducted?
That's what I want to talk to Scott and Christine about
Okay.
tomorrow, which is why I'll have more
About the-
information.
okay.
Yeah, that's why I'll have more information on Thursday. I have some ideas in my head, but I want to make
That's
sure
usually-
that Christine and Scott agree with me. So,
Usually good ideas too.
I'm having too many ideas. That's why we've met too many times.
Actually, I don't remember
No, I
that.
know.
Frankly, I mean, I could do other things at my time, but I think you handled it well. I think you did.
Well, I couldn't have done it without all of you. So I thoroughly appreciate the fact that this is normally not a time of year that anybody commits to be a part of this committee, and that you have. And
Budget cycle hasn't even begun.
I know, let's not even, I know. I do have to say, I've been very thankful that my office doesn't do taxes anymore, because the whole September 30th, September 15th, October 15th deadlines are normally the worst. And I was talking today to the person that took my tax business from me, and he's like, how are you doing? I'm like, better than you. So I thoroughly appreciate that. So, so yeah, I mean, I just want us to talk. I feel like we haven't had, I think we've been doing a lot of listening, and I don't feel like we've got a lot of time to talk to each other.
So, so we have the meeting Thursday.
Yeah.
And then the next one is the 26th.
Yes, the 26th.
And that is the hearing.
That is the hearing.
That's
Which is
the hearing.
more
That's
from
for us to listen again.
That's the hearing.
Yes.
And the hearing's gonna be here?
I don't know that yet.
Place, yeah.
Do we know? We don't know yet. We're gonna know by Thursday. We need to figure
At
that
the high
out.
school field, maybe,
I
yeah.
can tell you that you're not meeting here on November 2nd.
That I did know, yes. We are, November 2nd, I think we're probably gonna be over at the Public Safety Building.
It's like I have a formal meeting on Tuesday, and they're doing some questions. We would like to have.
They want their room.
They would like their room for that.
Okay.
So they're not gonna be there for the warrant committee hearing?
No, they're gonna, well, no, this is the night that we're gonna vote, the November 2nd. There is a selectman meeting in this room.
Right.
So they are gonna be preoccupied in their heads about what's going on with us, but having to focus on it.
I'm sure the news will get to them.
There you go. So, so yeah, so that'll probably be in public safety.
So in a traditional annual town meeting, a special town meeting, warrant hearing, we would read out the warrant.
Mhm.
That's not happening in this
Yeah.
so-called warrant hearing. But when we vote, someone, maybe you will
I would,
deliver the warrant.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, and that's,
The warrant article.
The Warren article, yeah, like, we'll definitely talk about that. I don't even have a copy of it yet. She's working on it, so,
As
we
we
will,
speak.
that's right.
Literally.
Literally, yeah. So, yeah, so we'll get all of that. So hopefully we'll have, so whatever I find out from my talk with Scott Christine tomorrow, I'll go over on Thursday and then we can, and then we can always take a little bit of time on at the beginning of the warrant. To talk about any of that with Scott being there. And then on the second, you know, clearly we'll talk, we're not just gonna walk into the room and vote and go home. I mean, we're gonna talk for a while. But let's talk about that on Thursday once I know more about what we're
Because it'll look at my face, that's what the teachers used to say.
Mhm.
But on that warrant hearing, on the 26th.
Yeah.
There are gonna be people who come in and just ask some basic questions again, which we've answered. Well, we haven't answered, it. We really directed them as to where to find the answer.
Yeah.
So when we have those questions, how are we gonna handle that night? Someone comes in, they're gonna be back to square one.
Well, I think that we're gonna kind of take that as it goes. I mean, I am gonna state at the beginning that this is not an like, the point of the warrant hearing is not for them to ask us questions. Like, all of our information's already out there.
It's a hearing.
It's a hearing for them to, like, normally at a warrant hearing, nobody ever comes. You know, like, normally we sit here, we read the warrants, we say how we voted. The difference is that, like, we'll read the warrant and we're gonna say we're to be heard. And then we're gonna say, does anybody have any comments? Normally, nobody's here. Chances are there's gonna be people there. And then they're gonna be able to come up and tell us their comments.
They'll probably tell us their views or what they.
Right, and so this is really more of a accepting of the views and things like that. It's not gonna be like a conversation like these things where they really go back and forth in my head. I mean, but we've never had anybody actually come to a hearing before.
Well, given that you're gonna have that conversation tomorrow, I would not like to see us recreate every meeting.
No, I don't think that that's what the hearing is for. The hearing is
Well, no,
literally gonna be like,
I understand-
let us
I
know what
agree,
you
but I
have.
want to set that parameter. Right?
I'm with you on that.
We've had all these public meetings. They're all public records. I don't want to be.
I think if somebody asks us a question, like, maybe we just have a cheat sheet as to which meeting that was and just be like, you know, you might wanna check out this one.
Right.
And that's really gonna be it.
Well, our question and answer that you
Yeah.
spent doing, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be published, like where everyone can?
Yeah, so it's
copy and-
already attached to our minutes from last week or the agenda, I'm sorry. It's attached to the agenda. It's gonna be the final ones, or the final draft one's gonna be attached to the agenda for Thursday.
Okay.
And then the intent is that on Thursday, we can talk about it. If anybody has any comments or changes, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept those as our answers.
Mhm.
And then Friday night with a glass of wine, I'm gonna send everybody their copy and paste. So what I was planning on doing, anybody that sent an email is gonna get their response.
Mhm.
Because I can't guarantee that they're watching this and have
Right.
heard it or that they have seen it. And then I think we can talk about on Thursday whether or not it just stays there, or it's probably not a bad idea to just put it on our website that says this was the Q and A, and then we
Yeah.
just add it, so we can talk about that on Thursday, make a motion for that too. Yeah. And then just put it up there and then let people know that it's there.
Yeah, people can access it at their leisure. and-
Yeah, you know, it's like 75 pages now. So we had 3 more questions. And 10 more pages.
I just don't want the hearing to be a debate.
It's not going to be. There's
Well,
no
right, I don't think
comments
it's
from
not
us, right?
structured.
The
There's no
hearing,
structure,
no,
right?
no, we just,
It's up to Madam Chairman.
no, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, this is part of what I'm gonna talk to Scott and Christine about. I mean, I'm gonna be a little bit of a hard ass when it comes to the decorum. I just think that a lot of these things, it's been bad. And, I have my dad's gavel and I'm probably gonna bring it.
There's one right over here.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah, can I use that one? Yeah, but I mean, I think that, so it's gonna depend on the volume of the people that come. If we have a lot of people that come, we're probably gonna have time limits, so everybody gets a chance. Like, I don't want, you know, we're gonna have some time limits. We're gonna, you know, I'm gonna give a little speech at the beginning about, like, don't talk over people. Let's not, you know, let's not heckle people. Let's let people finish their thought and then sit back down. And let's
Yeah.
treat everybody with respect.
Like I know, the one that comes to mind is the school committee hearing where they talked about the face mask.
Oh, yeah.
They had a lot of people on Zoom. They limited their time to like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
they
if we
weren't
have
answering
10 people
questions, they
show
were
up and they
just
don't want to
listening.
talk for 5 minutes, fine, but if we have 30 people show up, that, you know, like, we need to manage it. Because
But I mean, it's a hearing by definition. Listening.
we're just listening,
Right, it's not a Q&A. It's not a
Right.
debate,
No.
It's a listening.
we're just listening.
But could it turn into open mic at town meeting?
It could, but that's why I said that there needs to be, I mean, who knows, we may have 5 people show up, you know, we may have 30 people show up. I think that that's why, what I want to have for us on Thursday is like some proposed rules about it, and then we can all agree to what those will be, and then we'll kind of post them in advance that these are gonna be the rules that we're gonna go by. So I don't want to, I mean, whatever, we're voluntarily doing this hearing, just so you know, I volunteered us all because technically with a special town meeting, we don't have to do one, so if you wanna run for the hills, I just, it's above and beyond that we're doing it, but I think that we've had all these times for everybody else to come and talk, and I just think everybody's talking about it, and why not have an opportunity to hear from people we did send a special invitation. Gonna be what it's gonna be. I'll bring my water bottle. Filled up with filtered water. And regulated.
Don't anybody smell it, just it's water,
Hey.
okay, it's water.
Listen, my water bottle says, this is water. All right, would you like to?
Yes, motion to adjourn.
Okay, all right, so go around.
Yes.
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 Amanda, would you like to go home? But you're already home.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Maybe we should get together.
Sure. I need to.
26th, that's the Tuesday.
You just say.
Yeah, I have.
Probably not.
We just stuff this in here.
Oh, yeah.
Right, I'll
We're
send
still
you-
on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, or else we're gonna be recording forever. Thank you.